Welcome back, everybody, to our very final session of this inaugural conference on religious trauma. And I have saved a very special speaker for you to fill this role today. Chani is our final speaker. Chani is a licensed social worker and certified professional coach, raised in a Hasidic Jewish home. Chani has been particularly involved in providing support to LGBTQIA individuals and families for many years. Today, Chani will be instructing us on how we can embrace significant transitions and allow these experiences to teach and guide us rather than to break us. Welcome, Chani Gedder.
Thank you, Janice. Incredible this past few days, almost a week, that you have put together. Thank you, thank you. I want to let participants know that we can actually see your face if you show your face, and it's actually easier for me to teach when I see people's faces, but it's up to you if you want to keep it that way. Thank you, Janice. Thank you, the Sherpa group. Thank you for everyone who made this possible today, and for the many who have come before me in doing this work. My name is Chani Gedder, and I'd like to acknowledge that I'm joining you virtually from New Jersey, which is a part of the ancient homeland and traditional territory of the Lenape people. Thank you so much for being here and for listening and learning together. So, the process of change. I will be sharing here we go. Thank you. The process of change. This process that I will be sharing with all of you is taken primarily from Virginia Satir's work. I've included a lot of other people's work as well, but the process is hers. She was probably one of the first pioneers of family therapy, and realized that if one thing shifts, everything around it shifts as well. And so when we change, when we grow, everything around us shifts as well. And so I'm going to invite us all, for those of you who've been here for a long time, and those of you who might be your first session live, take a breath. We've learned a lot, we've shared a lot, and this is just another piece of it. So what happens? Each and every one of us at any single point in our lives have a status quo where we are. Where our physical spaces, such as our health, where we live physically, our gender expression at the time. Then we have something called an emotional space where we are, where we're comfortable being, whether we're stable or we are used to being on a very high stress level, whether our mental health is always yo-yoing or whether our mental health is kind of more up and down, right? Depending. So where we are emotionally doesn't have to be stable for it to be the status quo. Where we are emotionally usually is what makes it the status quo. If I walk around the world depressed, doesn't mean my emotional health is stable, but it does mean that my status quo is depression, right? So we all work within a framework of things being status quo. We have an intellectual way of being in the world. This includes the knowledge we've known, the way we interact with knowledge when people tell it to us, and the knowledge that we have access to, right? Because access is also something about intelligence. We have an educational status quo. Whether you were raised in a place where you were gifted education easily or not, is where you are in this moment educationally is a status quo until you shift into a different educational status quo. We have a spiritual status quo, who our community is, what we believe in, our relationship to something higher than self or not, a belief in something higher than self or not. Whatever that piece is, what that belief is, how we manifest that belief, and how we live within that belief system, whatever that belief system is, atheist, agnostic, religious, all are belief systems in which we live and have a status quo in. Financially, our jobs, our careers, which are not always the same thing, right? But what we're doing right now, what our career trajectory is, what our finances are, right? All of that under financial. Now, if I'm really poor, my financial status is not stable, but my status quo is poor and I'm used to being that way, right? So again, status quo is not about stability or instability. It's what I am used to and what I live within the framework of. And then relational. Relational, whether I'm single, whether I'm dating, whether I'm in a partnership, married, divorced, widowed, a parent, a child, a sibling, a friend. Sometimes when we lose a parent, the relational aspect, especially if it's our second parent, we all of a sudden stop being someone's child. And that shifts our relational being in the world. Just understand who we are in relation shifts and changes in that space. Relational also includes our sexual identity. How do we interact with someone, right? So again, our physical identity is our gender, our relational identity is our sex. And the reason I'm shifting it into LGBTQ language is because Janice specifically asked me to do that. She's like, can you also talk about your work in the LGBTQ world? And I just thought I'd just mix it into this bigger presentation. So we're all stable. We're all in the status quo. We all know exactly where we are, or think we do, or pretend we do, right? Okay, great. Now, there are 4 modes of living in the world. There are probably more, but I like to look at these 4 because it's easy to put them in boxes, and life is hard to put in boxes as it is. But let's just say there is not coping, right? I can live in status quo as not coping. Life is unmanageable. That's my status quo. I can live in status quo as coping and surviving. That's my status quo. I live in status quo as living. Life is good. Life is fine. I'm fine. Nothing needs to change. And I can live in status quo as thriving, which is life is awesome, amazing. I know how to eat joy. Literally, I know how to experience fun. I live in my life force at all times. That is thriving, right? So we all, within our status quo, have one of these modalities in which we live in and work in and are in. So Virginia Satir says that the way process of change happens is that a foreign object shows up. It shows up into our life. So what is a foreign object? A foreign object can be a book, a magazine, a show, a commercial, a YouTube video, I don't know, any social media thing you think about as foreign object, right? It can be a person. It can be a pastor or an atheist who shows up, right? Like it doesn't matter, but it's someone who shows up in your life. And whatever one of those things in status quo were before, you start questioning. It can be someone you fall in love with. It can be someone you break up with, right? Any of those kind of things. It can be a death. It can be a birth. This little child shows up or someone gets adopted into your life, and all of a sudden everything shifts, right? Relational shifts, like something starts shifting. Someone passes, depending on how close you were to them, your status quo will shift because of that, right? So the person, it can be as simple as a thought you'd never have before that shows up, that messes with the status quo in a way that frightens us, right? So something enters, it's a foreign object. And I remember the first time I heard, when I was reading her work and I saw the word thought, and I was like, thought is a foreign object, and realized what thought can do, right? It becomes a foreign object because it can shift everything, and it actually does. So we have this, these foreign objects that show up. And something within us usually goes to not coping when a foreign object shows up. It's like, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? Right? Like there's this I was thriving, I was fine, I knew everything, I was good. And all of a sudden, a foreign object goes up, and we just regardless of where we were before, something stops us and we go into not coping. It's just what happens for most of us. Again, not everybody, everyone has a different way of coping, but it tends to happen. And we step into this incredible space called chaos. where upheaval shows up, unsteadiness shows up, confusion shows up, and we are scared, like seriously scared. Sometimes this chaos looks like grief, right? And how does grief cycle? Usually denial, bargaining, anger, depression. We're not anywhere close to the acceptance part in this space of it. Anxiety, panic. We're just like not really sure what's happening, but we show up in real chaos. And part of the reason we show up in real chaos is because we are afraid that we will no longer be the person we were before, that the status quo that worked for us in the past will no longer work. And so we freak out internally because we don't really know what's going on. And we have a desire to forget the person, the place, the thing that happened. We don't want to think about it. It's daunting. This chaos place is not a linear place. It's very, very circular and messy and uncomfortable and difficult. And this happens in anything that we're shifting. So, before I go here, most of us will not move into the new status quo, which is where this process happens, unless the pain of staying is greater than the pain of integrating new learning. And I just want to name that. Most of us will not create a new status quo unless the pain of staying is greater than the pain of integrating new learning. That's just the way it is. And many of us will live in chaos for the rest of our life with this new thought, this new idea, this new way before integrating and creating new status quos. So, how do we integrate new learning? This is how we integrate. So, really, we're supposed to go, a foreign object comes in, and there should be a straight line from foreign object to chaos to integrating new learning. But what really happens is we start integrating something new and we go right back to status quo. I don't want to be here, and we run back. And what these lines look like is what happens. There is an author, Danan Perry, who talks about the parable of the trapeze. I'm going to take myself off of the share screen because I just want to share it with you, and then I'll come back. By the way, I call this chaos space the not knowing place. Anyone who's ever worked with me, any client, anyone's ever been to any of the groups I've ever facilitated knows Chani talks about the not knowing place. And this is like the most richest, exciting piece for me. What is this not knowing place? So, there is something called the parable of the trapeze by Danan Perry. And in it, he explains this process. Each and every one of us live on our own trapeze bar. We hang out there, we live there, we shake just enough to like get by, we're kind of happy. And then all of a sudden, we see this new trapeze bar coming towards us. And we know in that place of knowing that that trapeze bar has our name on it. And we need to jump through the chasm of time and space and catch that new trapeze bar. And we are terrified that we will fall into the stones or the river or whatever is under this. And we think we're going to die in that space of letting go because we know that it has to change us, this letting go and coming to a new place. So he says, every time I think about that, I know, and then he puts in parentheses, no, I pray that this time it will be different. But the reality is that from us to go from one trapeze bar to the second trapeze bar, we have to let go. What I teach my clients and anyone who I work with is how to get the swing right. So by the time, right, because we have to swing and we go back and forth and back and forth. And that's why I put the picture of like crazy tied upness in the chaos, because we go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, right? But what I say to clients is keep integrating new learning and go back to where you were. Allow yourself to swing until the swing is high enough that the integration of new learning is good, that you will be able to hold on and grab the new bar. What that looks like many times when we leave religion is finding new friends, creating new support system, leaving a job within the community and finding a new one, creating safety for yourself, right? So like building up all of the status quo that I said before, so that by the time we let go and we create that new status quo, we're safe. When someone goes through the chaos really quickly, the new status quo becomes too shaky and we can fall. We really actually can fall in this chasm between the two bars. And so the idea is learn how to swing, do it slowly, patiently, integrate one little thing at a time so that by the time you get to the other side, you have it. Okay, now I will share my screen again. And so we learn to integrate. We accept that this foreign object has changed our life. We begin to adapt. We begin to learn. We begin to stabilize and we continue to grow. And it is not as easy as it looks, but it happens for each and every one of us slowly and consistently. And in this space of chaos and learning, we're usually coping and surviving because we're learning how to be in a new way of being, something we've never had before. And then, as we integrate more and more and more, we begin to live. And we sit in the joy of enjoying our life as we integrate more and more. And then we have a new status quo. Sometimes it's only one of these pieces that has changed. Perhaps only our thought process. Perhaps only our new intellectual knowing. Perhaps our physical appearance. Perhaps our sexual identity. Perhaps our inquisitiveness. Perhaps our belief system. It could be one thing. But for many of us, when we leave religion or we actually begin to explore whether or not we want to stay, most of us are changing everything. I know for me, I come from a very ultra Hasidic Orthodox background. My dress code, my way of being, my thought process, and everything that I did every single day was pre-described, including the ways I tied my shoes. What I took off first and what I put on first and how I was in the world. And so everything changed. And I took a long time to slowly leave piece by piece so that I can keep integrating over and over and over again. And then we thrive. And every few years or every few months, something else will happen and we will shift again. Especially for those of us really living a way of seekers and searchers and truth tellers. We will keep going through this over and over and over again in our life because we change, we grow. People in our life get born and people die, and we exist within that of life. And so we have to integrate over and over and over again. Oh, wait. Okay. I guess we're done. And over and over and over again. So I'm going to put up the screen just for a second. If you want to get in touch with me, I don't write that often, but I'm trying to write at least once a month. You can connect to my blog spot. This is my website. If you want to contact me and look at my YouTube videos and things like that, click on chanigetter.com contact, and then you'll find like all the other stuff that is social media, which I'm not really good at, but I do have things on. So feel free to enjoy it. And then I also put Footsteps on because Footsteps is where I work part-time, and we help people leaving ultra-Orthodox Jewish religion. And you also probably heard from Pesach Eisen, my colleague, earlier in the week. And so I just wanted to make sure that you have this information. I think I'm going to take it off. I think you all have access, right? If someone's here, then they definitely have access to all the information. And so you'll be able to to see that. And I am going to open up for questions. Hi.
Was wonderful. Thank you. I can't believe you were able to squeeze all that in such a short amount of time. It was some great learning for us. Thank you. We do have a question. What are the signs that you have integrated the new learning well and that you're able to grab that other trapeze bar?
When you're not afraid to do that. There's always going to be a little bit of fear. Always. There's always some fear. But I believe that all of us needs to come along. We live in a society where most of us think that if I understand, then I will be okay. But trauma has taught us that trauma lives in the body and not in the mind. I can tell you my story 15 times, and unless I figure out how to move it out of my body, I will have flashbacks, right? Or whatever it is, the symptoms that show up for me. And that is true with everything. We live in a society that thinks if you can intellectualize it, you can do it. I don't think that's real. We're so much more than just our intellect. And so all of us need to be ready. So again, the way I grew up, very Hasidic. And I wanted to wear pants because A, I don't necessarily identify as female all the time. And B, skirts were never going to be my thing. So I went out and I bought a pair of jeans. First of all, I didn't know how to fit it. That's a whole other story. But I did buy a pair of jeans and wore it around the house first. And then I wore it whenever I went to a gay club. Didn't wear it all the time. And then I started wearing it amongst certain friends that I felt safe. And then I wore it whenever I went into the city. And then all of a sudden I started wearing it, right? We need to listen to what our body is telling us. The way we know to integrate is not when anybody else tells us, but when we know. And all of us, each and every one of us has a knowing. No therapist, no rabbi, no priest, no agnostic, no spiritual. I don't care what can tell you when you're ready. You know. Trust that knowing. Take a breath. Honor your cycle. Okay, so it takes you longer than others. Great. Or it doesn't. It takes you faster than others. Fantastic. Make sure you're ready before you do it. And make sure that you're not going to feel shame and guilt when you do it. If you are, figure out your shame and guilt stuff before you do it. Because the way that I live my life is that I wake up in the morning and love the person staring back in the mirror. That's how I want to live. Everything else is secondary. And I invite all of us to live that way. Look, I don't necessarily like certain things about me or whatever. That's great. But my choices, I live knowing that the choices I am making, I am okay with. And each and every one of us needs to do that on our own. We know when to let go of the trapeze bar when we're okay waking up the next morning, knowing that we've done that new trapeze bar.
Wow, so encouraging. We have another question. Pardon me. The point of what you're telling us seems to be, perhaps, to set the intention to surf the chaos or maybe to seek the external agent that enters. Is this a reasonable summary?
Yes. I think we all need to figure out how to live in that chaos spot. You know, Danan Perry in his thing, look it up. You can just look up The Trapeze by Danan Perry. You'll have the whole piece from his book. And in that summary, he says people think that we live on the trapeze bar, but he believes we actually live in the chaos. And that's where the most special and most alive things happen for us. If we allow ourselves to sit in not knowing, right? In this, he doesn't use the word not knowing, but he talks about this place that I call not knowing, right? And so if we allow ourselves to sit in the not knowing, our life is so much more vibrant. And so I invite all of us to figure out what will help us surf in that space. and also have really support systems. Find a support group for what you're thinking about. Find a therapist or a friend or someone or something. Write in your journal, run, hike, go out in nature or go into a dark room, whatever works for you. Like we all have different things that make us able to cope with the uncomfortable spaces we call life. And if we can give ourselves that space, we will not have to run away from our own life and from our own insecurity around this chaos, right?
Wow. Do we have any more questions for Chani? I do have a comment here from someone. You've helped me understand and label what I've been going through in the past month. I left 20 years ago and found integration. Now I've been experiencing what I've been describing as a second wave of reclaiming myself and examining residual beliefs, complete with flashbacks and new questions. Very deja vu.
Yes. Thank you. Who said that?
Someone who is anonymous.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Appreciate it. Yes, it is. It does happen deja vu over and over again. I'm thinking which story to tell, but it does. I think about when I started at Footsteps, and Lonnie, our executive director now, our CEO, our executive director then, our CEO now, literally found me in a volunteer service. Like I showed up to volunteer. I had left 10 years earlier, maybe more, maybe 12 years earlier, and I showed up at one of their volunteer things because I have a wife who encourages me to be better than I am. And so I showed up kicking and screaming, and I stood in the corner and listened to everybody. And it was like, okay, I'll be done and I'll be able to check off. I went to a volunteer. Great. Next. Lonnie literally makes a beehive and says, "You're Chani Getter, right?" And I'm like, yes. And we have this conversation. And in the past 8 years of me working at Footsteps, we have had an ongoing conversation of her wanting me to work there more and me wanting to work there less. And it's a consistent conversation of changing over and over. I walked in there officially working 10 hours a month. I give them close to 30 hours a week now, which I'm hoping to renegotiate again to do less, right? But like, this is what happened. And it's a constant shift. And working for Footsteps made me, I thought I had left, I'm doing fine. Working for Footsteps, speaking to people over and over again about their trauma, allowed me, in order for me to show up fully for them, I had to keep doing my work and uncovering more and more of what was happening for me, because I couldn't show up in that room and not be there for them. And I needed to figure out how to work with my stuff. And I still do. All these years later, I still do, because it keeps bringing up, because we change. I lost a friend last year, someone who I was close to, but was even more traumatic was that I was there when she died, and it was an accident. So it was not like she was sick, we were around her hospital. It wasn't that. It was like, it was an accident. We were there, just there. It changed everything I knew about death, because it was so sudden. It was so traumatic. It was so not expected in all the ways. I had dealt with death before, but usually had known about it, had expected it, had prepped for it. But this was like 1 minute to the next. I had to re-examine everything. Did I want to live the way I was living if I could go tomorrow? In the quickness of it. How did I want to show up with friends? And which friends was I willing to spend time with? It's a constant shedding over and over again as we grow, to sit in that space of, how do I continue to grow and re-examine and hold space for myself and those that I love. And here's the thing, if we're in relationship with anyone, by the way, even if our relationship is not speaking to them, I just want to name that. Having a relationship with anybody, including not speaking to somebody, is a relationship. Every time any one of those chips shift, we need to make a decision whether we're shifting with it or not. Is there a question or should I continue talking?
We've got one more question and then we're pretty much done.
Okay.
Do you
So
have...
let me finish
Sure.
this thought then.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So my parents didn't speak to me for 7 years. Okay. By the way, they didn't speak to me not because I wasn't religious. I just want to name that. They didn't speak to me because I drove a car. And as a female-bodied person in that community, you're not allowed to drive a car. Just to like understand, let alone that I believed or didn't believe that I'm queer or not. Like that wasn't even a conversation. I was a female-bodied person who left an arranged marriage with 3 children and wasn't supposed to drive a car. I don't know how I was supposed to do my life, but not drive a car was one of those things. And I just started driving a car. And my parents decided not to speak to me. 7 years later, my daughter had had an accident where we didn't know if she was going to make it, and she's fine now, but we didn't know. I had moved. I had graduated college. I had started college and graduated college. I had literally changed my life. And I got a call in the middle of nowhere. And this is how it went. Hello. Hi, Chani. It's mommy. The Messiah hasn't come yet, but your sister's getting married, and I'd love for you and your sisters and your children to attend. You know what happened? My entire status quo changed. And that happens over and over again for all of us. Because anyone in our circle, their status quo changes, we're invited to shift and change and grow and walk into the chaos with them, because that's how it works. Okay, I'm ready for the question.
Wow. And actually, I'm a little bit off on the time. We do have time. We don't have to feel like we're rushing at all. Let me see what we've got. Do you have tips for knowing our body better, to know what we're feeling or what we need to do next or limit ourselves? This has been very helpful and encouraging.
Thank you for that. I'm grateful that it was encouraging and helpful. Our body is an interesting thing, especially for those of us coming from religions, especially from a young age, where they teach us, don't respect your body, don't respect your mind, respect whoever, right? So for example, when there are things that come on every single, I think about Judaism in particular in this particular moment, but it works across the board, right? In Judaism, Friday, Shabbat starts, which means you put away your electronics and you have everything cooked before and all this stuff for the next 25 hours. Shabbat starts, the Sabbath starts Friday night when the sun goes down. Sometimes that's 3 p.m. in the afternoon, and sometimes it's 7:30 p.m. It doesn't matter. Shabbos starts. Now, if you're working or you're busy, nobody cares. Shabbos starts, you have to stop. If you grow up in an environment that teaches you that it's not about whether you're ready or not, but life has to shift because this is what tells you, you learn not to trust your own timing, right? You learn that this is the time I have to be at church or in synagogue or stop doing work or all my, otherwise I won't have food for Shabbos, right? So we learn to not trust our timing. For those of us who are taught that our bodies, and I know that this happens in Christianity a lot, where you're born in original sin, that kind of belief system, then we're taught that our bodies aren't sacred, that our bodies don't have intuition. And when we ask questions, we're told, oh, don't ask these questions, or we're given flippant answers. We learn really young not to trust our instincts, right? And so this is a brilliant question because it's very complicated, and it takes time. But here is like for me, an easy form. I ask myself, if I wake up tomorrow and I have done X or Y, how will I feel? If I wake up tomorrow and I have not done X and Y, how will I feel? And I walk through it so that I get to know what I'm really believing. Another great trick I heard is you take a coin and you flip it. And you say, I'm going to do Y if it's heads and Z if it's tails. And while the coin is in the air, you know where you want it to drop. That's what you do. Not how the coin lands, but what you know you wanted it to be. That's what you do, right? Because we need to trust our body and we don't really know how to. And so we learn these tricks. I toss a coin, heads or tails for this or that, and then I know what I want it to be. I don't need to look at the coin again. Another piece is there are great therapists around who understand body. Find one. There are somatic experience, internal family systems. I mean, there's a lot more, but these two come to mind. Trauma informed, someone who will maybe do meditation and incorporate it into it and allow you to like feel into your body, right? So ask when you're looking for someone to help guide you, ask questions. So, for different people, different things will show up, but the real piece in all of this, the kind of um, sweet spot is trust, even when everyone tells you not to. I have a client who comes from a very fundamental Christian home and was taught really young not to believe in herself and trust. And so much of our sessions are about letting her say what she thinks so she can hear it, and me just saying yes and noticing the fear cycle that happens because someone actually listened and her body's not used to it and what that does to her. Right? This is very, very, it's basic. Allow yourself to say the things you never thought you could say. Write them down and know that it's safe to do so. Whatever that is, it's safe to do so. You're allowed to think, feel, experience differently than anyone else on the planet because there are, I don't know how many billions of people, but each one of us can do life differently. We get to do that. We get to choose. We get to have autonomy in however we show up. And no one can truly tell us how to do that. It's kind of, we learn and we fall and then we get up and we do it differently the next day. I remember someone said to me, are you really comfortable doing this and this? And are you sure you're going to be comfortable doing it for the rest of your life? And I looked at him and I said, I don't know if I'll be comfortable doing it for the rest of my life. I'm comfortable doing it now. At any point in my life, if I stop being comfortable, I won't do it. The kind of shock that I can make a different decision tomorrow. Imagine that. I get to make a different decision tomorrow. We all do. I even get to make a different decision in 15 minutes.
That's so liberating. That's so liberating to hear those words and so encouraging. We have another question. How do you fill in the gaps between what you had learned it meant to be a parent and how you actually wanted to be a parent after leaving your community?
That was probably the hardest thing. I was a baby. I was married off at 18. I had 3 children. I was 23 when I left with 3 kids under the age of 5. My oldest wasn't 5. I had literally 3 babies. No idea on how to get an education. None of those things. Okay. I was lucky that in my community, if you were born female, you actually got a high school diploma, which my brother did not get. He was born male and so did not get a high school diploma where I grew up. But different. My brother doesn't speak English. It's just different for men and women where I grew up. But I was lucky that I had a high school diploma. The question about children, I had a really good therapist. And I really struggled with how to raise my children. I also didn't have family support, let alone, and I didn't have a new community yet. I didn't know people. The way to the internet was, you have mail.
Yeah.
Remember that? Like there was no Google, there were no forums, there were no what I had no idea how to find anybody. I woke up in the morning and I would say to myself, if I die tomorrow, what do I want my kids to remember? And I didn't know the answer, but I lived the answer. And I did that the next day and the next day and the next day. I woke up and I said, if I die tomorrow, how do I want to be remembered by? And I just kept living like that. I have 3 incredible young adults who call me mom. They each have their own path. And I think that I like what they'll remember me by.
Mm. Wow. Thanks everybody for your questions. You've really had some great questions for us. I've got one last one. I spent my entire life trying to fit a mold that just didn't fit. I became an expert at wearing a mask to appear as if I was fitting that mold, even though I wasn't. I've now cast off the mold, but I feel a bit like an empty blob looking for a new mold to fit. Any ideas on how to find your authentic self?
Mm. Try it on. Life is not about finding ourselves. It's about creating ourselves. So try it on. Go out on a hike. See if you like it. Become a hiker or not. I don't know. Go to a comedy club. See if you like it. Try it on. There are so many groups. If one goes on to meetup.com, there are billions of groups. Try them on. Create yourself. We don't find anyone when we go looking. Because who we are today has never been before. We are a compilation of all that has happened to us before, who then we become and walk into. So create yourself. Life is not about finding our authentic selves. It is about creating our authentic selves by trial and error over and over and over again.
I just want to let that wash over me, your encouragement about being autonomous and having some courage to try on different things and not feeling then like we're bound by those choices. Something that we've wanted to try today, we might try it and decide, no, that wasn't really for me. What's next? What am I going to try next? And that is so liberating and a beautiful way to live. This has really been wonderful. Chani, thank you for agreeing to be our final speaker on the last day of the conference on religious trauma.
Thank you for having me. And thank you all for showing up. I know it's been a long week for many of us. And I so appreciate that so many of you actually came in person. Many of you turned your cameras on. It makes me feel like I'm speaking and I could see what resonates and what doesn't by the way you interact on the screen. And that helps me whether go deeper in one thing or another. So thank you.
Yes. Well, thank you again. I have just a few things to say as we close out the inaugural conference on religious trauma. I want to thank each of you for showing up, for securing a ticket to help make this event a tremendous success. When I was first looking at doing the conference on religious trauma, I was told that if I would have 50 people who would attend the event, I was to consider it a success because it was a first-time event. I want to tell you, over 300 tickets had been secured for this conference. So thank you to each of you who helped spread the word about the conference on religious trauma. It has been such an overwhelming success that I will be doing it again next year. And there is a survey that I hope you'll fill out that will help me as I'm preparing to do the next conference. I would like to say a special thank you to all of our speakers, our tremendous keynote speakers, Dr. Marlene Winnell, Dr. Daryl Ray, Rick Allen Ross, and Janet Heimlich. And then I also am going to name all of our other speakers. I want you to make sure that you go back and listen again to their recordings. You have access to the recordings for up to 6 months. Thank you to Alice Gretchen, Angela Sophie, Annie Laurie Gaylor, Candace Gorham, Chani Getter, Dan Barker, Dave Warnock, Jen Kiaba, Jeremiah Kamara, Lisa Cohn, Mandisa Thomas, Pesach Eisen, Terry Daniel, Yasmin Mohammed, and a thank you also to our ex-clergy panel for sharing with us, Dr. Clint Haycock, David Hayward, and Tim Sledge. Speakers, I want to remind you that you're all invited to a post-event celebration sponsored by the CFFP, and that'll be starting in just a few minutes. You should have received an email invitation on how to get in there. And I will just leave you with the reminder that the next Divorcing Religion workshop will run July 14th to August 15th. You can visit divorcing-religion.com to find out more about that. Do make sure you take another peek at our exhibit hall so you can see all the offerings that are available from all of our fantastic speakers. Thank you, everybody, from the bottom of my heart. Take care, and I hope to see you again next year.